Emily, I've been thinking about this 4th of July weekend, and I want to make one thing clear before you even think about showing up at the house. Your brother Michael has built a life that actually reflects well on this family. He shows up, he contributes. He doesn't make everything about his own struggles. You, on the other hand, have a habit of turning every family event into a stage for your complaints. I'm not going to let that happen again this year. If you can't manage to keep your feelings in check and act like part of a united family, then maybe it's time you realized some people just don't fit the picture anymore. Michael and I have already discussed how to handle things if you start pulling your usual stunts. Don't make us have to use that plan. Hi, my name is Emily Harper. I am 29 years old. That phone call from my father ended with a click that left the line dead in my hand. I sat at the small table in my kitchen, the quiet of my neighborhood, pressing in from the windows, and felt the words settle like stones in my chest. He had called to talk about the gathering at their place, the usual reminder dressed up as concern. But the way he spoke about my brother Michael, the easy praise that flowed so naturally, made the old pattern feel sharper than it had in a long time. It was not new. It was just more honest than he usually allowed himself to be. I had spent years hearing versions of the same thing. Michael was steady, reliable, the one who made the family look good without trying. I was the one who needed reminders, the one whose feelings always seemed to complicate things. My father never raised his voice. He did not have to. The comparisons landed with the same quiet force every time, like he was simply stating facts that everyone already knew. I had learned to nod, to say I understood, to keep my own news about work or friends short so it would not turn into another lesson about what Michael would have done differently. This time felt different because of what came next. A text notification lit up my screen. It was from Michael. I opened it expecting maybe a quick note about what he was bringing to the weekend, or a joke to smooth things over after the call with our father. Instead, the message was clearly meant for someone else. Dad, I saw your message about Emily. I'll keep an eye on her this weekend. If she starts with the usual, why can't you see how hard I try stuff, or makes things awkward with the relatives, I'll shut it down quick. We need to keep the family looking solid for everyone. She either plays the part or she can sit this one out. Let me know if you want me to handle it differently. I read it twice. My hands went cold against the phone case. The words were not angry. They were practical, almost bored, like he and my father had already mapped out the weekend the way they might plan a work meeting. I was the variable they had discussed in advance, the one who might need managing so the rest of the family could keep pretending everything was fine. I set the phone face down on the table and stood up. The room felt smaller than it had 5 minutes earlier. I walked to the sink, ran cold water over my wrists, and tried to slow my breathing. Part of me wanted to believe it was a mistake, that Michael had typed too fast, or chosen the wrong name from his contacts. But the message was too specific. It referenced things my father had just said on the call. They had been talking about me when they thought I could not hear. I picked up the phone again and opened my messages with Olivia. She was the only person outside the family I had ever told the full truth to about how these gatherings actually felt. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed, "Can you talk? Something just happened with my dad and Michael." She called back almost immediately. Her voice was steady in the way I needed it to be. "Tell me," she said. I read her the text. When I finished, there was a long pause on her end. "Emily," she said finally, "that is not normal. That is not how brothers talk about their sisters when they think no one is listening." "I know," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. The part that hurts is how unsurprised I feel. I have spent so long telling myself the comparisons were just my father's way of pushing me to do better. But this makes it clear they see me as someone who has to be contained so the rest of the family can keep looking the way they want. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Are you still planning to go this weekend? I looked out the window at the dark street. A few houses down, someone had already put up a small flag for the holiday. I do not know. If I stay home, they will say I am the one who cannot handle being around family. If I go, I have to pretend I did not see that message. Either way, I lose something. You do not have to decide tonight, Olivia said, but whatever you choose, you do not owe them a version of yourself that makes them comfortable. You know that, right? We talked a little longer. She told me about a work thing that had gone sideways for her, giving me space to breathe before we hung up. After the call ended, I sat with the phone in my lap and let the quiet of the house settle around me again. The text was still there. I could delete it, pretend I had never seen it go to the gathering, and play the part the way they expected. Or I could carry the knowledge with me and see what happened when the careful image they had built started to show its seams. I did not sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my father's voice on the call and saw Michael's words on the screen. The two threads wove together into something that felt heavier than either one alone. By morning, I had made a decision. I would go, not because they had told me to, but because I needed to see for myself whether the family I had been trying to belong to for 29 years was real or just something they had agreed to perform when other people were watching. The drive to their house took less than an hour. I kept the radio low and tried to focus on the road instead of the conversation I might have to have. When I pulled into the driveway, my mother's car was already there, and Michael's was parked beside it. I sat for a moment with the engine off my hands, still on the wheel, and told myself I could leave whenever I needed to. That small reminder was the only thing that got me out of the car. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She smiled the way she always did at these gatherings, warm and a little too bright, like she was already working to keep the mood light. Emily, you made it. Your father was starting to wonder if you would change your mind. I stepped inside and set my bag down by the stairs. I said I would come. She glanced toward the kitchen where voices were already drifting out. Michael and your father are out back, talking about the fireworks display later. Why don't you go say hello? I nodded and walked through the house toward the patio doors. Through the glass, I could see my father standing with his back to me, gesturing with one hand while he spoke to Michael. My brother was nodding the same easy posture he always had around our father. They looked like a unit. I paused with my hand on the door handle and felt the weight of the text message in my pocket like it had physical mass. I pushed the door open anyway. The conversation on the patio stopped for half a second when I stepped outside. My father turned, his expression shifting into the version of welcome he used for company. Michael gave me a quick smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Emily, my father said, good, you're here. We were just talking about how to keep things running smoothly this weekend. I met his gaze and felt something settle in my chest, cold and clear. I know, I said. I saw the text. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. Michael's face changed, first the color draining from it as he realized what I meant. My father's hand, which had been resting on the back of a chair, went still. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant pop of a neighbor testing early fireworks somewhere down the block. I stayed where I was, the patio door still open behind me, and waited to see which one of them would speak first. The silence stretched between the three of us on the patio. My father's face had gone carefully blank the way it always did when something threatened the version of reality he preferred. Michael looked down at his phone like he was hoping it would give him an escape. I don't know what you think you saw, my father said finally, his voice low and even. But whatever it was, you're clearly reading too much into it. This is exactly the kind of overreaction I was talking about on the phone. The words landed with the same cold precision as always. He was already rewriting the moment, turning my knowledge of their plan into proof that I was the problem. I kept my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. I have the text right here. Michael sent it to me by mistake. It says you two already talked about how to handle me if I didn't play along this weekend. About keeping the family looking solid so no one sees any cracks. Michael's head snapped up. Emily, that was private. You had no right to what I asked. To know that my own brother and father were discussing me like I was some obstacle to your perfect weekend. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. This is what I mean. You take one message out of context and suddenly you're turning it into some grand conspiracy against you. Michael and I were just trying to make sure everyone has a good time. You've always been sensitive about these things. Your brother has never needed this kind of hand-holding. There it was again. The comparison slipped in like it was the most natural thing in the world. Michael didn't even flinch. He just nodded slightly like he agreed that I was the one making it difficult. I felt the old familiar ache start to rise, the one that came every time they lined me up against him and found me wanting. But this time it was mixed with something sharper. The text had made it impossible to pretend it was all in my head. Before I could answer, the patio door slid open again. My mother stepped out carrying a tray of drinks, her smile bright and a little too quick. Everything all right out here? I thought I heard voices. My father didn't look at her. We're fine, Patricia. Emily was just sharing some misunderstandings she had about a text. My mother's eyes flicked to me, then to Michael, then back to my father. She set the tray down on the table without saying anything else. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I could have let it go. I could have taken one of the drinks and changed the subject the way I always had. But the text was still in my pocket, and the way my father had just dismissed it in front of my mother made something in me settle into a different shape. I didn't misunderstand, I said, looking directly at my father, and I'm not going to spend the whole weekend pretending I did. If you and Michael need to handle me to keep up appearances, maybe I shouldn't be here at all. The words came out quieter than I expected, but they hung in the air like they had weight. My father's expression tightened. Michael shifted again, this time looking uncomfortable in a way that almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. My mother reached for my arm, her touch light. Emily, honey, let's not do this right now. Your Aunt Linda will be here any minute, and the others too. We can talk later if you want. The mention of my aunt made me pause. Linda had always been the one relative who didn't play by the same rules as the rest of them. She had a way of seeing through the careful performances without saying much, but even she might not be enough to change what was happening here. My father exhaled through his nose, the sound impatient. See, this is exactly why we have these conversations. You turn a simple family weekend into a crisis every single time. Michael never does this. He knows how to keep things easy for everyone. The jab was so familiar, it almost didn't register at first. Then it did, and I felt the sting of it in the same place it had always landed. I looked at my brother, waiting to see if he would say anything different this time. He didn't. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, letting our father speak for both of them. I took a step back toward the door. I need a minute. No one stopped me as I went back inside. The house felt too quiet compared to the tension on the patio. I walked to the front window and looked out at the street, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. Part of me wanted to get in my car and drive back to my own quiet neighborhood, back to the life I had built where no one measured me against my brother every time I walked into a room. But another part of me, the part that had carried the weight of these comparisons for years, was tired of running. The text had changed something. It had made the invisible dynamics visible, and I wasn't sure I could unsee them now. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another message from Michael or my father. Instead, it was from Olivia. "How's it going? Did you end up going?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "I'm here." It's already worse than I thought. They actually planned how to manage me this weekend. I called them on it, and now everything feels like it's about to break. I hit send and slipped the phone back into my pocket without waiting for a reply. Through the window, I could see my mother still on the patio with my father and Michael. They were talking in low voices, their heads close together. The picture of unity they wanted everyone else to see was already forming again, even after what had just happened. The doorbell rang. I didn't move at first. Then I heard my mother's voice calling from the patio that she would get it. A moment later, the front door opened and I heard my Aunt Linda's warm laugh as she greeted my mother. Linda had always been different. She asked real questions and didn't accept surface answers. If anyone in the family might understand what I was feeling, it was her. But as I stood there listening to the sounds of more people arriving, the laughter and the casual hellos starting to fill the house, I realized something else. The image they had worked so hard to protect was already cracking, and I was the one holding the hammer. The question was whether I was ready for what would happen when it finally broke all the way open. I took a breath and turned away from the window. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to spend another holiday swallowing the comparisons and pretending it didn't hurt. The text had given me proof. Now I just had to decide what to do with it. Later that evening, the house had filled with the usual mix of relatives and neighbours who came every 4th of July. The backyard smelled like charcoal, and the faint smoke from the first round of fireworks someone had set off too early down the block. I stayed mostly near the edges of conversations, nodding when people asked how work was going, keeping my answers short. My father moved through the crowd with easy charm, introducing Michael's girlfriend, Amanda, to everyone, like she was already part of the family. Michael stayed close to him, laughing at the right moments, never once looking in my direction. I had almost convinced myself I could get through the night without another confrontation when I stepped out onto the back patio for some air. The string lights my mother had hung earlier cast a soft glow over the tables. Most of the guests were still inside or gathered near the grill. I thought I was alone until I heard footsteps behind me. "Emily?" It was my father. He closed the patio door behind him and walked over to where I stood by the railing. His voice was quiet, but the edge underneath it was unmistakable. "We need to talk about earlier. You embarrassed yourself out here, and you're going to embarrass the rest of us if you keep this up." I turned to face him. "I embarrassed myself by pointing out that you and Michael were planning how to manage me like I was a problem." He let out a short laugh that had no warmth in it. "There it is again, always making everything about you. Your brother has never once made a scene like this. He understands that sometimes you have to put the family first instead of your own feelings. You could learn something from him if you ever stop being so wrapped up in yourself." The comparison landed exactly where he knew it would. I felt the familiar tightening in my throat, the old urge to shrink back and apologize just to make the moment pass. But the text was still in my phone, and the memory of Michael's silence on the patio earlier kept me standing where I was. I'm not the one who sent a message about handling a family member like she was an inconvenience, I said. "You and Michael did that. I just happened to see it." My father's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the house where the sound of laughter and conversation drifted out through the open windows. You want to do this here, fine? Michael and I were trying to protect everyone from exactly this kind of drama. You've always been the one who can't let things go. Your brother has a life. He has responsibilities. He doesn't turn every holiday into a referendum on how hard job done by he feels. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, the patio door opened again. This time it was my Aunt Linda. She stepped out holding a plate of food she clearly hadn't touched yet, her eyes moving between my father and me with the quiet attention she had always had. Robert, she said, her voice calm but carrying. I think the others are starting to notice the tension. Maybe this isn't the best place. My father didn't move. Linda, this doesn't concern you. Emily's decided she wants to turn a simple family weekend into something bigger than it needs to be. Again. Linda set her plate down on the railing. She looked at me for a long moment, then back at my father. It seems to me like Emily's the only one here who's willing to say what's actually happening instead of pretending everything is fine for the sake of the picture. The words hung in the air between us. My father's face went still in a way I had rarely seen. Michael's girlfriend, Amanda, appeared in the doorway behind Linda, clearly looking for Michael, and stopped short when she sensed the shift in the air. Inside the house, someone laughed loudly at a joke I couldn't hear. The sound felt far away. I stood there with my aunt's unexpected support on one side and my father's cold anger on the other, and realized the careful surface we'd all been standing on was finally giving way. The text had started it. My refusal to keep swallowing the comparisons had kept it going. Now the only question left was how much of the image would survive once the rest of the family saw what had been underneath it all along. The air on the patio felt charged as more people began drifting toward the backyard from inside the house. My aunt Linda stayed where she was, her presence a quiet anchor I hadn't expected. My father's eyes flicked toward the growing group, clearly aware that whatever happened next would no longer be private. He lowered his voice again, but the contempt was still there. You're really going to do this in front of everyone? Make a scene and prove exactly why we have to be careful around you. I felt the old pull to apologize, to smooth it over so the image could stay intact. But the text in my pocket and Linda's steady gaze beside me made it impossible. I'm not making a scene, I said loud enough for the nearest relatives to hear. I'm refusing to keep pretending the comparisons and the planning behind my back are normal. You and Michael decided I needed to be handled. I decided I don't. Michael appeared in the doorway with Amanda beside him. His face was tight. Emily, stop. You're blowing this out of proportion like you always do. Dad was just trying to make sure the weekend went smoothly for everyone. You're the one turning it into something it's not. Amanda shifted uncomfortably, looking between us. A couple of cousins had stopped talking and were watching now. The manipulated unity was cracking in real time. Linda spoke again, her voice calm but firm. It doesn't sound like blowing it out of proportion to me, Michael. It sounds like Emily finally saw what the rest of us have been tiptoeing around for years. Robert, you've spent decades measuring her against her brother and acting surprised when it hurts her. That's not family, that's control, dressed up as concern. My father's face flushed. He opened his mouth, then closed it when he saw more eyes on him. The power he had wielded through quiet comparisons and private plans was slipping in front of the very people whose good opinion he had always guarded so carefully. I took a small step back. I came here because part of me still wanted to believe we could be a real family. But the text and the way you both reacted showed me the truth. I'm done performing for it. I'm done letting you decide what version of me is acceptable. The words felt like they came from somewhere deeper than the hurt. They came from the part of me that had built a life where I didn't have to earn belonging every time I walked into a room. My mother appeared at the edge of the group, her expression torn. She didn't speak up for me, but she didn't defend my father either. That silence said more than words. Several relatives began to murmur among themselves. One cousin quietly steered his kids toward the front of the house. The distancing had already begun. My father tried one last time, his voice tight with the effort to keep control. If you walk away, now don't expect us to keep making space for you. Michael and I have always carried the weight around here. You've never understood what that takes. I met his eyes. I understand enough. I understand that blood doesn't automatically mean love or respect. And I'm choosing the people and the peace that don't require me to shrink to fit. I turned and walked back through the house. Linda followed me to the door. She didn't try to convince me to stay. She just squeezed my shoulder once and said, "You did the right thing. Some images aren't worth preserving." Outside, the night air was cooler than the tension inside. I got in my car and drove back to my own neighborhood without looking in the rearview mirror. The fireworks were starting somewhere in the distance, bright bursts against the dark sky. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to go back and fix anything. In the weeks that followed, the calls from my father stopped. Michael sent one short text that said, "Only hope you're happy with how you handled things." I didn't reply. My mother reached out once, a vague message about missing me at the next holiday. But there was no real invitation, no acknowledgement of what had been said. The relatives who had witnessed the crack on the patio began to keep their distance too. Family group chats grew quieter when I was included, then stopped, including me altogether. The surface harmony my father had obsessed over was gone, and in its place was something quieter and more honest absence. It hurt in a way I hadn't expected. The loss of even a flawed version of family left an ache, but underneath the ache was something steadier. I no longer had to measure my worth against my brother's life or swallow comparisons to keep the peace. I could protect my own. Olivia checked in often and Linda called every few weeks just to talk about ordinary things, no agendas, no performances. Those connections felt real in a way the old ones never had. One evening, a few months later, I sat on my own back step with a cup of tea listening to the quiet of my neighborhood. No one was comparing me to anyone. No one was planning how to manage my presence. The text message that had started everything was long deleted, but the clarity it brought remained. Blood relation does not equal love. Sometimes the people who share your name are the ones who teach you that lesson the hardest. And sometimes choosing yourself means accepting that the family you thought you had was only ever an image they needed you to maintain. I had lost the illusion of unity. What I gained was the freedom to stop pretending it had ever been real. Protecting my peace turned out to be the wisest choice I could have made, even when it meant the picture finally broke. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt the weight of being compared, managed, or asked to perform for the sake of someone else's image, I hope this reminds you that your peace is worth protecting, even when it means the picture they wanted finally breaks. What would you have done if you had seen that text?